Advice has the power to change lives, but not in the way most people think. It's not just about receiving words of wisdom from someone experienced. It's about the shift that happens in our perspective when we truly internalize what is being said. Imagine a moment in your life when someone gave you a piece of advice that made you pause, reflect, and rethink everything. That moment wasn't just about the advice itself. It was about how it changed the way you saw yourself and the world around you. The power of perspective is what makes advice transformative. You can hear the same words 100 times, but until you are in the right mindset, those words mean nothing. That's why two people can hear the same advice, and one of them will walk away unchanged, while the other will have a breakthrough. It's not about the words, it's about the way we receive them. Perspective is everything. The moment we shift our perspective, our reality changes. Think about a person walking into a dark room. If they only focus on what they cannot see, they feel lost, uncertain, even fearful. But the moment someone hands them a flashlight, everything changes. The room didn't change, the obstacles didn't disappear, but their perspective did. They can now see what was always there, hidden in the darkness. That's what great advice does. It illuminates what was already present, but unseen. It doesn't change our circumstances, it changes how we view them. There's a reason why advice that truly impacts us often leaves us speechless. It's because it reveals a truth that was already there, buried beneath our doubts, fears, or assumptions. It shakes us to our core because it feels like we should have seen it all along. And in many ways, we did, we just weren't ready to accept it. When someone gives us advice that shifts our perspective, it's not that they are giving us something new. They are helping us see what we have been blind to. This is why timing matters so much. The same advice given too early will fall on deaf ears. Given too late, it might lose its impact. But when the timing is just right, it has the power to change everything. That's why people often say that when the student is ready, the teacher appears. It's not that the teacher wasn't always there. It's that the student wasn't yet ready to receive the lesson. Think about a time when you faced a challenge and someone gave you a piece of advice that didn't seem to make sense at first. Maybe you even dismissed it. But then, months or even years later, you found yourself in a moment where suddenly those words came back to you with a new meaning. That's perspective in action. You weren't ready to see it before, but now, because of your experiences, your failures, your growth, the same words hold a new weight. We often think that we need more information to make better decisions. But more often than not, we don't need more knowledge. We need a new way of looking at what we already know. That's what perspective does. It allows us to take the same information and see new possibilities, new opportunities, and new solutions that were invisible to us before. This is why some of the most successful people in the world emphasize the importance of mentorship, learning from others, and seeking wisdom. It's not because they lack intelligence or experience, it's because they understand that someone else's perspective can reveal things they would never have seen on their own. The greatest breakthroughs don't come from knowing more, they come from seeing differently. But here's the catch. Not all advice is useful. Just because someone offers their perspective doesn't mean it's the right one for you. That's why discernment is key. The ability to filter advice, to recognize which perspectives truly serve you, is just as important as being open to receiving them. Some advice is based on fear. Some is based on limited thinking. Some is rooted in personal biases. The real skill is learning to identify the perspectives that expand your possibilities rather than limit them. There's a story about an elephant tied to a small wooden post. As a baby, the elephant was tied with a strong chain to a heavy stake. No matter how much it tried, it couldn't break free. Over time, the elephant stopped trying. As an adult, it could have easily pulled away from the small post, but it never even attempted to. Its perspective was fixed. It believed escape was impossible, even though reality had changed. The only thing keeping it stuck was its own mindset. Many of us are like that elephant. We carry old beliefs, old fears, and old limitations that no longer serve us. The right advice at the right time can break those chains, not because it gives us something new, but because it makes us realize we were never truly trapped in the first place. That's the power of perspective. This is also why the best advice isn't always easy to hear. It challenges us. It makes us uncomfortable. It forces us to question the narratives we have been telling ourselves. That's why some people reject life-changing advice. They aren't ready to let go of the mindset that is keeping them stuck. But for those who are willing to embrace discomfort, who are willing to shift their perspective, that advice becomes the key to unlocking new possibilities. A person can live in the same city their entire life, but suddenly see it differently after hearing a single story. A student can struggle with a subject for years, but suddenly understand it when a teacher explains it from a new angle. An entrepreneur can be stuck in a failing business, but completely turn it around after a mentor shifts their way of thinking. Nothing about the world changed, only the way they saw it did. The question then becomes, how open are we to shifting our perspective? How willing are we to listen to advice that challenges us, that makes us uncomfortable, that forces us to grow? Because at the end of the day, it's not about how much we know. It's about how well we see. And sometimes the right words at the right time can change our vision forever. That's why the most powerful advice leaves us speechless. It doesn't just give us answers. It forces us to ask new questions. It doesn't just change our minds. It changes the way we see everything. And once our perspective has shifted, nothing is ever the same again. Advice has an interesting way of shaping our lives. It comes in different forms, sometimes from a mentor, sometimes from a friend, and sometimes from a complete stranger who says something that sticks with us for years. But advice is only as powerful as what we do with it. The lessons embedded in advice often represent years of experience condensed into a few words. They provide a shortcut to wisdom, allowing us to see what we might have otherwise learned through trial and error. But just hearing advice isn't enough. The difference between those who succeed and those who remain stuck is not how much advice they receive, but how much they choose to act upon. Many people collect advice like they collect books, stacked high on a shelf, gathering dust, never truly used. They seek wisdom from others, nod in agreement, feel inspired for a moment, and then return to the same habits, the same patterns, the same limiting beliefs. The truth is, knowledge without action is meaningless. You can be given the best advice in the world, but if you do nothing with it, it will have no impact on your life. The difference between those who grow and those who don't is not who receives more advice, but who applies it with consistency. Consider this: two people hear the same advice. One takes action, even if imperfect, while the other waits for the right moment. A year later, one has transformed, while the other remains in the same place, still waiting. Advice only works if we allow it to. The most valuable advice often requires effort, discomfort, and change, things many people avoid. That's why advice that challenges us is often the most powerful. It pushes us beyond our comfort zone, forcing us to grow, but many resist it because growth is uncomfortable, and humans naturally seek ease and familiarity. There's a reason the most successful people in any field are those who act quickly on good advice. They don't just listen, they implement. They don't wait for the perfect conditions, they adjust as they go. They understand that growth is not about knowing more, but about doing more with what they already know. A person who applies one powerful piece of advice will always be ahead of the person who collects 1,000 lessons, but does nothing with them. It's easy to assume that experience is the best teacher, and in many ways it is. But what if you could borrow the experience of others and learn in days what took them years? That's the power of great advice. It gives you insights from people who have walked the path before you. It allows you to avoid their mistakes, replicate their successes, and accelerate your own growth. But only if you take action. Too many people listen to advice and assume that just hearing it is enough. They believe that because they understand the lesson, they have already changed. But understanding is not transformation. Action is. The best advice often feels uncomfortable because it forces you to confront something you've been avoiding. It might be a harsh truth about your habits, your mindset, or your excuses. It might be something you know deep down but have refused to acknowledge. That's why the best advice often doesn't make you feel good. It makes you feel exposed. And that exposure is necessary because we cannot fix what we refuse to see. Growth starts when we stop avoiding the hard truths and start acting on them. Imagine standing at the edge of a swimming pool, afraid to jump in. You watch others swim with ease, yet you hesitate. A coach stands beside you and gives you advice on how to jump, how to move your arms, how to breathe. You nod, you understand, but you remain on the edge thinking about it. Meanwhile, another person takes the same advice and jumps in. They struggle at first, but they adjust. They learn through action. Weeks later, they are swimming effortlessly while you are still standing in the same spot waiting for the perfect moment to jump. That's the difference between hearing advice and using it. Many people are trapped in a cycle of waiting for motivation, for clarity, for the right time. But waiting is the enemy of growth. The truth is, no moment will ever feel perfect. The conditions will never be completely right. The clarity you seek will not come before you start. It will come because you start. Advice is not meant to sit in your mind like an interesting idea. It is meant to be tested, applied, and turned into action. But there's another challenge. Not all advice is helpful. In a world filled with opinions, it's easy to get lost in conflicting guidance. Some advice is rooted in fear. Some comes from people who have never done what you're trying to do. Some is outdated or simply not relevant to your unique journey. That's why the ability to filter advice is just as important as the ability to follow it. The most successful people are not just those who take advice, but those who take the right advice. Discernment is key. You must ask yourself, is this advice coming from someone who has achieved what I want to achieve? Is it based on real experience or just theory? Does it challenge me in a way that leads to growth, or does it reinforce my fears? The best advice will often make you uncomfortable, not because it is wrong, but because it requires you to change. And change is never easy. There is a famous story of a young monk who sought wisdom from a master. He arrived eager to learn, but as the master spoke, the young monk continuously interrupted, offering his own thoughts, opinions, and experiences. The master smiled, then took a cup and began pouring tea. He kept pouring even after the cup overflowed. The young monk, confused, finally exclaimed, "The cup is full. No more can be added." The master replied, "Exactly. You are like this cup, so full of your own thoughts that there is no room for new wisdom. Before you can receive, you must first be empty." Many of us are like that young monk. We seek advice, yet we resist it. We listen, but we do not truly hear. We are so full of our own beliefs, assumptions, and past experiences that there is no room for new perspectives. That is why some people can receive the best advice in the world and still remain stuck. They have already decided what they believe, and anything that challenges those beliefs is dismissed. But growth requires an open mind. It requires humility. It requires the willingness to empty our cup and make space for new wisdom. The real challenge is not finding good advice, it's being ready to receive and act on it. Because the truth is, most of us already know what we need to do. We've heard the advice before. We've read the books, watched the videos, listened to the mentors. But knowledge is not power. Applied knowledge is. The difference between where you are now and where you want to be is not more information. It's action. So the next time you receive advice that shakes you, that makes you uncomfortable, that forces you to see yourself differently, don't just nod and move on. Don't just collect it like another inspirational quote. Act on it. Let it change you, because the only advice that truly matters is the advice that leads to action, and the only action that matters is the one you take today. Advice has the power to change lives, but only if we are ready to receive it. Many times, the best advice doesn't comfort us. It challenges us. It forces us to face things we have been avoiding. It is often not what we want to hear, but what we need to hear. And that is precisely why it has the power to leave us speechless. The right words at the right time can shake us to our core, making us question our beliefs, our choices, and even the way we see ourselves. One of the hardest things about receiving life-changing advice is that it often contradicts what we thought we knew. We walk through life holding on to assumptions, shaped by our past experiences, by the environment we grew up in, and by the beliefs we've formed over time. And then, in a single moment, someone shares a piece of advice that shatters that illusion. It makes us stop and think, have I been looking at this all wrong? That moment of realization is powerful. It can be uncomfortable, even painful, but it is necessary for growth. The truth is, we rarely change until we are forced to. Human nature resists change, because change requires effort. It requires breaking old patterns, stepping into the unknown, and doing things differently than we have in the past. This is why advice that truly impacts us is often difficult to hear. It challenges the very foundation of how we see the world. It reveals a truth we weren't prepared to face. And when that happens, we are left speechless, not because the advice is complex, but because deep down, we know it is true. The difference between those who grow and those who remain stuck is not how much advice they receive, but how much they are willing to act upon. Some people hear life-changing advice and immediately apply it, while others hear the same words and do nothing. Why? Because action requires courage. It requires stepping out of our comfort zones and embracing discomfort. That is why advice, no matter how profound, is worthless without action. You can hear the most powerful wisdom in the world, but if you do nothing with it, nothing will change. There's a story about a young student who asked a wise teacher for the secret to success. The teacher took the student to a river and led him into the water. Suddenly, the teacher pushed the student's head underwater and held it there. The student struggled, gasping for air. Just before he lost consciousness, the teacher pulled him up. Gasping in panic, the student demanded, "Why did you do that?" The teacher smiled and said, "When you want success as badly as you just wanted air, then you will find it." The student was speechless. That is the nature of true advice. It is not always pleasant. It is not always wrapped in comforting words. Sometimes it shakes us so deeply that we cannot respond. But those moments of silence, of deep realization, are the beginning of transformation. They force us to ask ourselves, am I really ready to change? That is why the best advice often makes us uncomfortable. It strips away our excuses, our fears, and our doubts, leaving us with a simple choice: act or remain the same. Yet not all advice is equal. Some advice is rooted in fear, given by people who have never taken risks themselves. Some advice is given by those who failed and want to project their fears onto others. The key is learning to separate valuable advice from limiting beliefs disguised as wisdom. The best advice often comes from those who have been where we want to go. Their words come from experience, not theory. They have failed, learned, adapted, and succeeded, and their advice reflects the lessons they have lived through. But even when the best advice is given, not everyone will take it. Why? Because listening is easy, but acting is hard. People often nod in agreement when they hear wise words, yet continue making the same mistakes. That is because change requires effort. It requires the willingness to be uncomfortable. And most people would rather stay comfortable in their struggles than put in the effort to grow. Imagine two people attending the same seminar, listening to the same life-changing advice. One person leaves inspired, but does nothing with it. The other applies what they learned immediately and transforms their life within a year. What made the difference? Not the advice itself, but the action taken afterward. Wisdom without action is just noise. The people who succeed in life are not those who receive the most advice, but those who use the advice they receive. The uncomfortable truth is that growth is painful. Change is difficult. It is far easier to stay where we are, doing what we have always done. That is why many people remain stuck in the same patterns for years. They seek advice, but they do not want to do what it takes to change. They want new results, but they do not want to let go of old habits. The irony is that the very thing they fear, change, is the only thing that will set them free. The best advice is not just something we hear, it is something we feel. It resonates deep within us, forcing us to reflect. It does not just give us answers, it forces us to ask better questions. It does not just motivate us, it challenges us to take action. That is why life-changing advice is not always comfortable. It does not feed our ego or reinforce our beliefs. Instead, it forces us to confront our fears, our excuses, and our self-imposed limitations. We must learn to welcome uncomfortable advice because it is often the advice that will help us grow the most. If we only listen to what makes us feel good, we will remain exactly where we are. But if we open ourselves up to advice that challenges us, that pushes us, that forces us to evolve, then we will experience real transformation. At some point in life, we will all be given a piece of advice that shakes us. It will force us to see things differently. It will make us question everything. When that moment comes, we have two choices: ignore it and stay the same, or embrace it and change. The choice is ours. Because in the end, the best advice is not the advice we simply hear, it is the advice we act upon. And what we choose to do with it will determine everything. Sure, here's an expanded version of 4 keynotes up to 2,000 words without any headings. Advice has the power to transform lives, but only when we are truly open to receiving it. The right words at the right time can shake our entire belief system, leaving us speechless, not because they are complex, but because they reveal a truth we have long ignored. Many people go through life searching for guidance, but few are willing to act on the advice that can truly change them. The uncomfortable truth is that growth requires discomfort. Real transformation doesn't come from hearing what we want to hear. It comes from hearing what we need to hear and then taking action on it. It's easy to collect advice like we collect books, stacked on a shelf, untouched, gathering dust. People attend seminars, read motivational books, and listen to great mentors, yet many never apply what they learn. Why? Because taking action is difficult. It requires effort, change, and a willingness to let go of old habits. The difference between successful people and those who remain stuck is not the amount of advice they receive, but the amount they act upon. Two people can hear the same life-changing words, but only one will implement them. The other will nod, feel inspired for a moment, and then return to old habits. This is why knowledge alone is never enough. Wisdom comes from application. Many people seek advice but are not truly ready to receive it. They ask for guidance but only want to hear things that align with their existing beliefs. When they receive advice that challenges them, they dismiss it. Growth requires an open mind, a willingness to unlearn old patterns, and the humility to admit that we don't have all the answers. One of the hardest things in life is realizing that we have been wrong about something we deeply believed. But that realization is also the beginning of true wisdom. The best advice often contradicts what we thought we knew. It forces us to reconsider our choices, our behaviors, and our mindset. That's why it can leave us speechless. It reveals a truth we weren't prepared to face. People resist uncomfortable advice because it threatens their comfort zone. Human nature craves certainty, familiarity, and validation. We want advice that reassures us that we are already on the right path, even when we are not. But the most powerful advice does the opposite. It forces us to confront our fears, acknowledge our weaknesses, and challenge our excuses. That is why most people ignore or reject the very advice that could change their lives. They want new results, but they don't want to change their old ways. They want success, but they don't want to make sacrifices. They want growth, but they don't want to feel uncomfortable. The truth is, the advice that makes us uncomfortable is usually the advice we need the most. The greatest breakthroughs in life often come from moments of deep discomfort. A harsh truth, a painful realization, or a difficult lesson can be the catalyst for profound change. Imagine someone struggling with their career. They feel stuck, frustrated, and unfulfilled. They seek advice and are told, "You need to stop waiting for opportunities and start creating them." That advice may sound simple, but it carries a deeper challenge. It forces the person to take responsibility for their own growth. It means letting go of the belief that success is about luck or external circumstances. It means putting in extra effort, learning new skills, and stepping into the unknown. That realization is uncomfortable, but if embraced, it can lead to massive transformation. But we often assume that experience is the best teacher, but in reality, evaluated experience is the real teacher. Many people go through life repeating the same mistakes without learning from them. They face challenges, but instead of growing, they complain. They struggle, but instead of adapting, they give up. The difference between those who evolve and those who don't is not the amount of experience they have, but how they reflect on and learn from that experience. Advice allows us to shortcut the learning process by gaining wisdom from those who have already been where we want to go. But only if we listen, only if we apply it. Not all advice is created equal. In a world filled with opinions, it's easy to get lost in conflicting guidance. Some advice comes from people who have never done what you're trying to do. Some advice is based on fear rather than wisdom. Some advice is outdated or simply wrong. That is why the ability to filter advice is just as important as the ability to follow it. The best advice comes from those who have lived the lessons they teach. It comes from people who have failed, learned, adapted, and succeeded. It comes from those who understand the journey, not just the theory. If you want to grow, seek advice from people who have walked the path before you, not from those who only speculated about it. However, even the best advice is useless if it is not acted upon. Many people are addicted to consuming information but allergic to applying it. They read book after book, attend workshop after workshop, yet their lives remain the same. Why? Because transformation requires action. A person who applies one powerful piece of advice will always be ahead of the person who collects 100 lessons but does nothing with them. The people who achieve great things in life are not the ones who know the most, but the ones who do the most with what they know. There's a famous story of a young monk who sought wisdom from a master. He arrived eager to learn, but as the master spoke, the young monk kept interrupting, eager to share his own thoughts and knowledge. The master smiled and began pouring tea into a cup. He kept pouring even as the tea overflowed. The young monk finally exclaimed, "The cup is full, no more can be added." The master replied, "Exactly. You are like this cup, so full of your own beliefs that there is no room for new wisdom. Before you can receive, you must first be empty." Many of us are like that young monk. We seek advice, yet we resist it. We listen, but we do not truly hear. We are so attached to our own perspectives that we reject anything that challenges them. That is why some people can receive the best advice in the world and still remain stuck. They have already decided what they believe, and anything that contradicts those beliefs is dismissed. But growth requires an open mind. It requires humility. It requires the willingness to empty our cup and make space for new wisdom. Some of the greatest transformations in life happen not when we hear something new, but when we finally accept something we have been resisting. Often, deep down, we already know what we need to do. We've heard the advice before. We've read the books, watched the videos, and listened to the mentors, but knowing is not enough. Change does not happen in the mind. It happens in action. The biggest gap in life is not between what we know and what we don't know. It's between what we know and what we do. That is why the best advice will always lead to action. Advice that does not inspire action is just noise. True wisdom forces a decision. Will you act on it or will you ignore it? The greatest regret people have in life is not what they tried and failed at. It's what they never tried because they were too afraid to take action. In the end, the most valuable advice is not the advice that simply sounds good. It's the advice that pushes us to do better, to be better, and to create the life we truly want. At some point, everyone will receive a piece of advice that shakes them. It will challenge their excuses, their fears, and their limitations. It will force them to choose between staying the same or stepping into growth. That advice may come from a mentor, a book, a friend, or even a stranger. But when it comes, the question is not whether the advice is powerful. The question is, what will you do with it? Because in the end, the best advice is not the advice we hear. It is the advice we act upon. And what we choose to do with it will determine the course of our lives. Here is an expanded version of 5 keynotes up to 2,000 words without any headings. Advice has the power to change everything, but only if we allow it to. The right words at the right time can shift our perspective, open new doors, and break the mental chains that keep us stuck. But the reality is most people don't want advice that challenges them. They want advice that comforts them, that reassures them they are already on the right path, even when they are not. Real advice, the kind that leaves us speechless, is rarely easy to hear. It doesn't validate our excuses. It doesn't support our self-imposed limitations. Instead, it forces us to confront our deepest fears, our blind spots, and our own role in shaping our destiny. One of the hardest things in life is realizing that we've been wrong about something we deeply believed. We all build our lives around certain ideas. Ideas about success, happiness, relationships, and what we are capable of. But what if some of those ideas are holding us back? What if the very beliefs we cling to are the reason we feel stuck? This is why the best advice can feel like a punch to the gut. It reveals uncomfortable truths. It forces us to question our assumptions. And in that moment of realization, we are left speechless, not because the advice is complex, but because we know it is true. Growth doesn't happen in comfort. We often say we want change, but when faced with the actions required to change, we hesitate. Why? Because change is painful. It requires effort. It demands that we step into the unknown, abandon familiar habits, and take responsibility for our own progress. That's why so many people remain stuck. They hear great advice, they nod in agreement, but they do nothing with it. The difference between those who grow and those who don't is not how much advice they receive, but how much they act on. It is easy to listen. It is hard to apply. The people who achieve extraordinary success in life are not the ones who receive the most wisdom, but the ones who use the wisdom they receive. Many people go through life waiting for motivation, for the perfect moment, for permission to act. They say they want success, but they are not willing to take risks. They say they want growth, but they are afraid of failure. And then one day they hear a piece of advice that changes everything. No one is coming to save you. If you want change, you must create it yourself. That simple truth can be terrifying, but it is also liberating. It means we are in control. It means we are not victims of our circumstances, but creators of our own destiny. But here's the catch. Knowing this truth is not enough. Acting on it is what separates those who succeed from those who don't. The mind is a powerful thing. It can either be our greatest asset or our biggest enemy. The way we think determines the way we live. If we believe we are capable of greatness, we act accordingly. If we believe we are limited, we act accordingly. The best advice often challenges the way we see ourselves. It forces us to let go of limiting beliefs that have shaped our actions for years. Many people hear the advice, "You are capable of more than you think," but they dismiss it. They tell themselves, "Not me. I'm not smart enough, strong enough, or lucky enough." But the truth is, those who achieve greatness are not special. They are just willing to act despite their doubts. They feel fear but move forward anyway. They fail but keep going. The only thing stopping most people from achieving their goals is their own belief that they can't. And when that realization hits, it changes everything. The world is full of opinions. Everyone has advice to give, but not all advice is worth following. Some advice is based on fear rather than wisdom. Some advice comes from people who have never taken risks themselves. The key is to be selective. The best advice comes from those who have been where you want to go. It comes from those who have failed, learned, adapted, and succeeded. Yet, even the best advice is worthless if it is not acted upon. There is a famous story of a man who sat by a river, praying for years that God would send him a boat to cross to the other side. Every day, boats passed by, but he never got in, believing that the right boat would be sent specifically for him. When he died, he asked God, "Why didn't you send me a boat?" And God replied, "I sent you dozens, but you never got in. The lesson? Opportunities come, advice is given, but if we don't act, nothing changes." People often seek advice hoping for an easy answer. They want success without struggle, results without effort, and change without discomfort. But real advice doesn't provide shortcuts. It provides clarity. It doesn't eliminate struggle. It teaches us how to navigate it. That is why the best advice often feels like a wake-up call. It forces us to stop making excuses, to stop waiting for the perfect moment, and to take action. The most valuable advice doesn't just inspire us. It challenges us. It doesn't just make us think, it makes us move. Most people already know what they need to do. They don't need more information. They need to act on what they already know. The biggest gap in life is not between what we know and what we don't know. It's between what we know and what we do. Some people hear great advice and immediately put it into practice. Others hear the same advice and do nothing. Why? Because taking action is uncomfortable. It requires stepping out of old habits, embracing uncertainty, and pushing through fear. That is why success is rare, not because wisdom is rare, but because the willingness to act on wisdom is rare. There's a reason why the best advice often leaves us silent. It reveals something we've been avoiding. It forces us to confront a truth we were not ready to face. It strips away our excuses and leaves us with only two choices: remain the same or take action. In that moment, we realize that our future is not shaped by chance, but by the choices we make. And the greatest choice of all is whether we will use the wisdom we receive or simply let it pass us by. At some point, we will all hear advice that could change our lives. It may come from a mentor, a book, a conversation, or even a stranger. When that moment comes, the question is not whether the advice is powerful. The question is, what will you do with it? Because in the end, the best advice is not the advice we hear, it is the advice we act upon. And what we choose to do with it will determine everything.